Welcome into the Through the Whistle podcast right here on Chicago Sports Network. Jake Butt, Michigan Wolverine, All-American tight end, team captain. Joshua Perry here, Ohio State Buckeye national champion and team captain. Listen, Jake, before we get started, I know you had to get some coffee, warm up the bones. How you feeling this morning?
Chilly. You said it. What is it like? It's like 0 degrees wind chill here in Chicago, and I can't believe I was walking around in like a quarter zip light hoodie just a few days ago. We're in the thick of it here in the Chicago winter days. But aside from that, Joshua, I'm feeling really good. How are you feeling?
Feeling pretty good. Got a lot to talk about here. It seems like a month ago, as much as we've covered this thing in between, that the playoff bracket was released. We got to start off with that. Also got some other great topics coming up. A couple of Michigan players declared for the NFL draft. We'll talk a little bit about that. Got a huge bowl game between Illinois and South Carolina. Give our top line thoughts there. And then some big news in the world of college football generally. Bill Belichick. How about that?
Crazy.
It's not something any of us had on our bingo board, and we'll give you our thoughts on that as well. But let's start with the college football playoff, of course. As I mentioned, the bracket came out. We got 12 teams that will be competing for a championship. Oregon got the number one overall seed. They were the number one team for a big majority of the regular season, won their conference championship game against Penn State. Other teams receiving a bye: Georgia, the champion of the SEC. You got Boise State, who was a group of 5 champ. Arizona State in there as well. And then you had Clemson, who was the champion of the ACC, kind of a bid thief in this scenario, but they got their way in at 12. They'll be matched up with Texas in the first round. Ohio State will be hosting Tennessee in the first round. Penn State gets SMU, who lost the ACC championship in the first round in a home game. And then you've got a little in-state battle between Notre Dame and Indiana going down in South Bend. When this final bracket came out, what were your overarching thoughts about not only the matchups, but the structure of the bracket?
Yeah, the obvious one to look at is Oregon being 13-0, running the table, beating Penn State. You took down – Dan Lanning took down the 3 teams that ran the Big Ten. He started taking down Ohio State. Then he went to Ann Arbor, took down Michigan. He met Penn State and got Penn State's best shot, took them down in the Big Ten championship. And how did he get rewarded? With a much harder path than the team he just beat in Penn State. That's the one that obviously jumps out. And it's frustrating because it defies logic. Like, it goes against logic to structure it. And I get the bye aspect of it. Like, the bye is valuable. But you should get a bye and the easiest path. Right? It shouldn't just be, well, you get a bye. And I know Dan Lanning has handled it well. I give him a ton of respect because he's not pointing fingers or running or ducking or anything. That's the big thing that jumped out to me, though. And, man, James Franklin, you better make a run now. You better make a run. You better win those 2 games and make a run into this playoff because you were gifted a favorable path.
I'm going to start with the James Franklin thing, and I'll circle back to what you were talking about originally. So James Franklin in this path would have SMU to start. They get that game at home. They're calling that a whiteout. Then they would get Boise State if they won that football game. After that, they would have an Indiana, Notre Dame, or Georgia in the semifinal. If Penn State wins those first 2 games, and then let's say they match up against Notre Dame or Georgia in the semifinal and they lose that game, are people still saying the same thing about James Franklin that they were saying coming into the year? Like, you would beat SMU, which is a team that you would typically beat. You would beat Boise State, which is a team that you would typically beat. But when it comes to a team like a Notre Dame or a team like a Georgia, those are not the teams that you usually beat. Are people still frustrated with James Franklin if that's the case? They made it to the semifinal.
I guess there'll always be people that are frustrated, but I would consider that a win for Penn State if they could make it that deep. I would consider that a win.
Not me.
You wouldn't? Okay? So what's a win for Penn State
if they win in the semifinal?
To get to the Natty, beaten.
Yeah.
Okay.
Based off of the path, right? Like, he's not being asked to do anything in the first 2 rounds that he isn't typically asked to do.
Those are good teams now. Those are good teams.
Right, but he can beat teams in the top 25. He can beat teams in the 11 to 25 range. He doesn't beat teams that are in the top 10. He doesn't beat teams that are in the top 5.
I think those are going to be tougher games. They're winnable games. They're heavy favorites in those games. I think those are going to be tougher games than what people think.
I think Vegas has their game against SMU as they're a 10.5 point favorite in that. And then if they were to win, I think they would be a 12.5 point favorite against Boise State.
I know. I know. I know. You're going to get the best shot from those teams. You're going to get the best shot from those teams. What was Michigan favored against TCU? You know,
I'm
right?
I'm not arguing that, but like,
here's
again,
another thing. Jerry, you know, Jerry DiNardo. Jerry DiNardo has kind of flipped my perspective on this. My co-host, colleague over at the Big Ten Network, James Franklin's, I think, in his mid 50s. And he's like, we're talking about a must win for a guy in his mid 50s. We're talking about the legacy of a guy in his mid 50s. And I was like, dang, Jerry, you're right. You're right. These things take time. Like, you know, most of the times that James has lost against these top ranked teams, he wasn't expected to win those games.
I agree with that.
So that's the other side of this.
They don't pay you, you know, $8+ million a year to only win the games you're expected to win, though. I think that's where the frustration comes for a lot of people. Like, you've been there for a decade, right? I don't think anybody's been around the Big Ten longer than James Franklin, except for Kirk Ferentz, right? So you've been there for a decade, and you only win games that you're expected to win most of the time, right? Like, there are a few occasions where he pulled, but I don't pay you to just beat up on teams you're supposed to beat. I pay you with the expectation that at some point you beat Ohio State. At some point you beat Michigan. And I think he's done that like 3 times total.
Yeah.
Out of 20 chances in the decade that he's been around.
You're telling me, let's say they win handily SMU. Let's say they win handily Boise State. And let's say they play competitive in the semis versus whoever. Well, what are you saying? Disappointment, but don't win. Play competitive, but don't win.
He was competitive against Ohio State last year. He was competitive against Michigan last year. He was competitive against Ohio State this year. He was competitive against Oregon. Bro, it gets frustrating. It's the same movie.
I don't know, man. To me, that's not. I don't think they have a great championship roster. That's the other thing about this. Like, you know,
is that not another thing where you would look at him and be like, why don't you have a better championship roster?
Well, the wide receivers are concerning. The secondary dealt with some injuries.
Concerning is a very kind way.
Yeah, but I know the tight ends make up for it. All right, Tyler Warren's going to make up for it. Some of those guys,
the tight end
boys. Yeah. Okay, then I came away from we can even just to me, I look at the way they played in the Big Ten championship, and I thought Oregon was going to run them off the field.
Same.
And they fought, They almost did, but Penn State fought. And I give a ton of credit to a team and James Franklin for keeping his team in it. And Drew Aller showed me something there too, because he made some big throws and led his team on some big time drives. Like, I came away saying that I thought that was a positive experience for Penn State.
I think 2 things can be true: that you feel more confident about Penn State after losing the Big Ten championship, and the idea that you still need to see them get a big win to feel great about everything for that program, right? Like, that was always the question about the 12-team era. Is it still going to feel like the same 10-2 program, but the only reason that you feel better is because they made it into a bigger playoff? And with this path, I kind of feel like it's setting up for people to still get there to the semifinal, and don't let him lose before that, but to get there in the semifinal and still be like, it feels very similar to what we've seen before.
Well, I guess the other thing is, and we've talked about this a ton, like, regardless of who they play, like, there's not one team. Oregon's the only team that's been flawless this season. You know, there's not one team. Texas is one of the betting favorites. Georgia, one of the betting favorites. Ohio State, even up there. All those teams have flaws, clear flaws that can be exposed.
Sure.
So I guess that's the other piece of it is Penn State has flaws, but they're not alone in this 12-team bracket. Every team's beatable on any given day this year.
All right, let me ask you this question. So let's say Indiana makes a run to the semifinal and they meet up with Penn State, the 2 teams that were in the top of the Big Ten that did not meet in the regular season. Indiana wins that football game. What happens there?
Oh, that's bad. That will be real bad. That I think the Penn State fans could stomach a loss to a lot of teams. I don't know about Indiana. That's and no offense to Signetti, because I think they have a good team too. Honestly, I really do. They're a capable team, and Signetti's a capable coach. But Penn State fans know them as Indiana. And if you lose that game, oh man, I would not want to be James Franklin. Wouldn't want to be.
Yeah, I'm pretty much there with you. It's going to be an interesting thing just looking at, kind of that program and what people have had to say about them and what they've been, kind of historically under James Franklin in the grand kind of landscape of the Big Ten and college football. They have the opportunity, I think, to really heat up and to make some noise here. But there is this underlying idea for me that folks can still walk away and ask, does this feel much better than what we've typically felt at the end of the year? I wanted to circle back to what you were originally talking about, though, just in terms of the structure of this bracket. I think this is bad. And I'm going to be dramatic here. I think this is awful for college football because I think with the way that this postseason has been structured, the power brokers in college football have told us that the national championship is not the most important thing. They have told us that conference championships are important. They have told us that maintaining the overall structure of the sport feels more important. They have told us that inclusion is more important. But the thing that kind of comes behind all of that is actually crowning a champion. It's flawed for multiple reasons. Number one, you don't have the committee's own top 12 in here. Because of the conference championship tie-in, Clemson gets in. They kick out an Alabama team, which I'm not crying any damn tears for them. They made their bed. They got to lay in it. But it's hard to avoid the idea that the committee had them ranked as one of the top 12 teams, and they're not in here. I asked the question, are you trying to create a field that is inclusive and representative of college football, or are we trying to create a field that would have the best teams? It's my number one question. The second thing is, to your point, the path here does not make sense. It's really hard to stomach Arizona State having a bye over some of the other teams that are in this field.
Yeah.
You kind of look at Boise State, and I love the work that they did. I'm not trying to discredit them, but at no point in the whole college football season did anybody, including the committee, think that they were the number 3 team in the nation and they got a top 3 seed in this field. At the bare minimum they could do is just, if they want to keep the conference championship tie-ins, do whatever the hell you want. The bare minimum they could do is take their rankings 1 through 12, put in your conference champs, and then just put the seeds there without the conference championship being tied to a bye. Because then you would have a situation where now, I can't remember what Penn State ended up being. I think they would still keep Notre Dame out of it. But you'd have Texas and you'd have Penn State as teams that would receive a bye, which I think is a lot more equitable based off of what they did this year than Arizona State and Boise State being the teams.
It's because we are acknowledging that this looks like an NFL model, but the college football is not the NFL. Like, the NFL rewards a bye because for the most part, all else is equal and anyone can beat anyone on any given day. But the path that Boise State had to get to their current place and the path that Arizona State had to get to their current place is much different than Texas, Ohio State, Penn State, some of these teams, even Alabama, that didn't get in. We can't treat this by rewarding Boise State and Arizona State with a bye. We're treating it as if it is all equal, but it's not. And I even think those guys, they would have to acknowledge that, right? Like, they would have to acknowledge that. So I don't have an issue with the 12 teams that got in as much as I do with the seeding. I don't even have an issue, the SMU Bama debate. Like, God, Bama, when you lose to the teams you lost to this year, I don't feel bad for you at all for not getting in. That's not a championship team. Like, you can't just choose and pick when to play to your best and not, especially against fraudulent teams.
Right.
And that's even different than Ohio State losing to a very average Michigan because of the rivalry aspect. Like, anyone can win that at any given time. So I don't have an issue as much with the 12 teams as I do with the seeding and the incentives that we've just kind of handed out to Boise. Are we in a better place because Boise and Arizona State are those, and even the truth is, are those the brands we want?
No, We're not in a better place.
Deserving or really the brands we want. So
I think you could make the argument that we might be in a better place because Boise State is in the college football playoff, period. Right? Like, I think the idea that the group of five is viable and it's a place where you can retain solid coaches and good players who maybe didn't get an opportunity at a bigger school feel like they can go to group of five schools. I think that is a positive overall. But also, this is the best team in the group of five all year long who played Oregon within 3 points at home. They would have been in there if you would have just ranked them 1 through 12. Like, I think my biggest takeaway off of this is usually I come away from this and I'm like, the committee. I think the committee did their job. They ranked the teams probably pretty close to what I would have ranked them. They were handcuffed by a structure that is bad. The structure is no good. And so they couldn't effectively do the job. Does that make sense?
No, 100%. And okay, we've had this. Now I'm starting to see the full picture a little bit as we talk through it. Why not just use whatever your model is to rank the top 12? And why reseed? If you have earned the 4th seed, then you've earned the bye. No way can a 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 team get a bye over the 5th seed. What the hell are we talking about?
It basically distills the body of work of all these teams throughout the course of a season to one game on the last Saturday of the college football season, right? Like it takes what Texas did all year long and it puts all of that into conference championship weekend, where they lose to the only team that beat them on their whole schedule 2 times. The only team that beat them, they lose again to them. And now it's like, you can't get a bye. But it's like, does that take into account everything else I did all year long? Right. And it is a frustrating thing when you kind of get to that point of like, you know, Clemson's the best example of this. They're in, they don't have a bye, but they're in. They managed to lose 3 games in the regular season.
And
right. So like
smoked by Georgia.
But since they don't play in the SEC, which they lost to 2 SEC teams, and they play in the ACC, they get to be in. And it's like, I got to ask a question. How good does that really feel?
I see, but Clemson, if you win your conference, I don't have an issue as much with Clemson.
But why? Because I feel like that's the equivocating of like, we think that Clemson's ability to win their conference is representative of their ability to win any conference. We think Arizona State's ability to win their conference is indicative of their ability to win the SEC or the Big Ten, because the prize is the same. The reward is the same. But it's just not the case. They lost to 2 SEC teams. We watched it.
But there's do you value wins more than you penalize losses? And like Bama is the team that's hurt by all this. And I penalized the heck out of Alabama for losing to freaking Vandy. Like, some of these teams Bama lost this year is inexcusable.
No, I'm not gonna sit here and necessarily argue that. I think in the way my little mind works, I think that it is significantly harder to beat good teams than it is to lose to bad teams. I think winning is difficult.
Okay.
I also think you only get one mulligan. You only get one mulligan before I get to say, I'm kind of done with you. I don't get to watch you lose to 2 6-6 teams. I can watch you lose to 1, but the idea that when you're Alabama, you also beat Georgia, and you also beat LSU, and you also beat Missouri. These are teams that were ranked by the committee. I'm willing to overlook the one time you slipped up. They slipped up twice. I don't feel bad for them, but I do resonate with this idea that it is much harder to beat good teams than it is to lose to bad football teams.
What you just said is so true. That as a principle, it is harder to beat a very good team than it is to lose to an average team. But if you lose to an average team more than once, you lose my sympathy.
Right.
period.
Because
right?
now there's too much variance. Like
right.
you could actually be a bad football team on a given Saturday.
Yeah.
Right.
And
like
Bama's been a bad football team on a number of Saturdays, as has Georgia, as has pretty much every single team here.
But even Georgia, though, as bad as they have looked at times, lost to Ole Miss, who had a good season. They lost to Alabama, who had a good season. They beat Texas twice, right? Like they've got some big wins under their belt here. Like I look at Georgia and say, even with their variance, the worst that they would do is lose to a top 15 team. Yeah. Alabama, with their variance, the worst that they're going to do is lose twice to 6-6 football teams.
Yeah. Yeah. Sorry, Bama. We don't feel bad for you. And it was in conference, so don't talk to me about scheduling either. Bums.
That's the other thing
here. Don't
here.
talk to me about that either, bums.
Let's have the conversation real quick. I feel like the conference commissioners are very smart people. A lot of these, they've done business. They deal with big contracts. They know communication. They know messaging. And they've tossed out the red herring of, well, since strength of schedule doesn't matter, we're not going to schedule tough non-con P4 teams. They scheduled Wisconsin. They went 5-7. They had Central Florida, they had Western Kentucky, and they had Mercer. They won all four of those games. Where they lost was in conference to teams that were not good in their conference. This isn't about out-of-conference scheduling. And I would make the argument that it can't be about strength of schedule only. Because if we cared so much about strength of schedule, Purdue, you get to be in because you had the toughest strength of schedule. Mississippi State, you had a really difficult strength of schedule. Part of the strength of schedule thing is you actually have to win games. And frankly, you can't lose games to the bad teams. When it comes to the strength of schedule, we might excuse a loss, maybe two, to the best teams on your schedule because you probably beat other good teams. But if all you do is lose to the bad teams, I cannot have this conversation. It can't be entertained. They're trying to get you to think about the wrong things.
Yes.
Don't be fooled by it.
Yes. That's it. How can you be fooled by it?
Because these people, critical thinking is in short supply right now.
You don't get an easier out of conference schedule than what they have.
Oh, man.
Mercer. Come on.
Yeah.
Vanderbilt. You can't be losing to Vanderbilt. Let me ask you something. We haven't talked about your Buckeyes.
What about them?
At home, hosting Tennessee.
Yeah.
Where are you at? Man, the roster didn't change. Everything we liked about them for the most part, aside from the injuries across the offensive line, haven't changed. All that changed is they lost a inexcusable rivalry game to Michigan. But really, everything we loved about them hasn't changed. The defense still played great that day.
You know what else hasn't changed?
The coach.
The thing I dislike about them right now.
So then where are you at here? Where are you at?
I'm going to tell you exactly where I'm at. I'm going to have a real transparent conversation. So my wife and I were planning on going to this game. I have season tickets. I don't use them. I work on Saturdays covering the sport. But my mom and dad will typically either go to the game or they'll sell the tickets. They've been buying them just so we don't lose them. And so we had the opportunity to get our season tickets for this game, this home playoff game. Very similar process as a regular season game for getting tickets. And then there was a pre-sale to get extra tickets if you were a season ticket holder, if you wanted to buy them. So parents went ahead, got season tickets, and we hopped on the pre-sale. And as I was going through, I was just like, you know what? I actually don't want to go to this game because I don't want to be cold and potentially miserable after this game. That's kind of where I'm at right now. I'm proceeding with caution. I will watch it at home. I will be fully into it. I'll be hoping for the best for my alma mater. I couldn't get invested to the point of spending money, putting on my cold gear, and sitting in that stadium that Saturday night. That's kind of where I'm at with this thing. And it's unfortunate because I'm probably being too pessimistic when it comes to the chances for Ohio State. But, like, this is one of those games where, I kind of feel like I've seen what can happen. And Tennessee is built like a better version of Michigan. Dylan Sampson, I think, was the offensive player of the year in the SEC. He's a Tennessee running back. They run the hell out of the football. They have a good defense. Their defense is the best thing that they do.
And a good D-line, too.
Come on, man. Like, it's one of those where I'm looking at the way that this thing is built, and I'm letting the doubt seep into my mind. And I hate doing that. But that's where I'm at right now.
I get it. It's crazy to hear you say, because like I can at least understand why, like we can follow the path to how they lost to Michigan. And I'd say, man, I can't see that happening again. But man, I still love that defense. And the defense has been playing great. All things aside, since the Oregon game, they've elevated.
Yep, they have.
I don't think they'll ever. The big question is will Ryan Day and Chip Kelly learn from that game? You know, like, will they learn from that game?
They have to, right?
Yeah, and then maybe they're better off from it. Could it be? I
don't know. I mean, one of the things that gives me pause is, Ryan Day was talking about the Michigan game and some of the play calling. And one of the things that he said was the wind affected how they wanted to call some of the game. And from the standpoint of Will Howard doesn't have the strongest arm and he doesn't throw a tight spiral, so it becomes a little bit more difficult to cut some of the throws against the wind. I understood that. You and I sat there. We watched the All-22 tape. I didn't think the wind was the reason why.
No.
But if that's your excuse, brother, what do you think the weather's going to be like when you play Tennessee?
Yeah, but also this, you can't just, to me, that's another red herring, because you can't just say, oh, it's just the wind. You have to factor into this. You also have to factor in the fact that your plan, because of the wind, was to run behind a beat up offensive line into a $250 million worth of NFL D tackles.
Dude, we talked about
continually.
We talked about it, man. They had an option play that went to the outside, sprung for like 15. They didn't attack field side runs very often. They went away from running the traps that were working. They went away from running those. Like, I'm totally there with you, but this is also a bit of a pattern for me, right? What was it? 2021, it was snowy and some guys had a cold. In 2022, it's just 5 plays, right? Like, it was only 5 plays. We're 5 plays away. And it's like every damn time it feels like there's something.
Yep.
It's like, just go out there and do what you need to do.
It's you become a reflection. Teams become a reflection of their head coach. I saw somebody talking about, Mike McDaniels when the Dolphins went up to Green Bay and Green Bay won. And someone pointed out that Mike McDaniels looked cold down on the sideline. That's something analytics doesn't account for. But you'll never see Big Red look cold in Arrowhead in January in the damn playoffs. Belichick never batted an eye to the weather. In fact, he was prepared for the weather and told his team, we will use it to our advantage because we're more prepared. When you're talking about a team, when the players are saying it was cold and we had the flu, that started somewhere. Certain coaches have to say, F that. What do you get off the team if you're going to talk about it's the damn
so cold. That I think that point about get off the team if you're going to talk about that, the way I've always thought about it in particular with college players is I feel like you only share things that you feel comfortable sharing. You share the things that are talked about.
Bang. Yes.
Right. Like, I don't think that was something that like one guy just created when he got up to a podium. Like, I think that was something that was talked about. It's really unfortunate. All right. I want to change directions here. You mentioned somebody who we need to talk about here. It ain't Big Ten news, but it is big news. Bill Belichick, the head coach of the North Carolina Tar Heels, as is being reported right now, 5 years, $50 million, a lot of money. And he brought this 400-page manifesto about what he wanted to do at UNC. And I think a lot of this was talking about alignment of people and alignment of resources. The board of trustees need to be on board. The boosters need to be on board. University president, athletic director. He wanted to bring in some different positions, a GM, which is not uncommon to college football right now. Probably doesn't want to be as hands-on with fundraising as other coaches have to be right at 72 years old. It's a really intriguing thing. I wanted to get your thoughts specifically, and then I'll kind of share what I've got on this.
There's a bunch of ways to look at this. And for North Carolina, you have to acknowledge that they went from the oldest coach in college football to the oldest coach in college football. So everyone's going younger. They're saying, you know what, let's make a play on wisdom. This just surface level doesn't make sense. Bill Belichick having to deal with recruiting and NIL, and he's going to, you see the videos of Brian Kelly dancing to get recruits. Belichick isn't doing that. But as I've unpacked this a little bit, I'm pretty confident Belichick is going to be able to raise money from his friends as much as he is from the boosters. I know he helps Jed Fish out there at Washington. People want to have dinner with Bill Belichick. People want to sit down with Bill Belichick. Bill Belichick becomes the program. Right. I also think I look at Signetti and I say honesty wins in a world where we're lying to kids to get them to come help us. Honesty wins. North Carolina as a program is going to be capped by the commitment that they have to help out Bill Belichick. But man, I guess it also depends how we define success. Like I can see a path to where this becomes successful for Bill Belichick. I am hesitant to count him out at this stage right now in his career as the head coach in North Carolina.
It's an interesting thing. I feel like you talked about it and you kind of couched it the way that I think most college football people have talked about this, where there is a ton of upside. There should be a lot of excitement. You could see a path to this thing being successful, but like there's also this other side of this might not work and it could be a disaster.
It's risky and it's a $50 million risk.
It is. The NFL people who are talking about this are acting like he's going to come in and within 3 years, he's going to be like a national championship coach. I cannot see that.
I can't see that.
The NFL, and I know people keep pointing to this idea that like college football is becoming more like the NFL. It is, but it's not even close, right? You don't get as much time as you would have in the NFL to spend around players. Like he's going to be pissed that first time he's in his quarterbacks meeting and his starting quarterback says, I got to go to study hall. I got to go to class. I can't be here. Hey, my girlfriend just called me and she's having like a mental breakdown and I got to go. Like he's not going to be able to deal with that. And these are the things that you have to deal with. He's not going to be able to deal with this idea that you don't get to designate the contract. These guys are 1 year at a time, and you always have to be recruiting them. And they might come to you after having a season where they only had 2 sacks and they said, Coach, I need $1.5 million, I need an apartment, and I need a car. And they're being serious. And they're serious because some dope out there is going to give it to them if they come. Right? Like these are the things that he's going to have to deal with, that it's going to be like, dude, what the hell did I get myself into? The other thing I'm very intrigued by is I know part of what he does and part of the allure is you bring out 6 Super Bowl rings you won as a head coach, the 2 that you won as a coordinator, and you tell guys, I can make you an NFL player. I know what it takes for you to be successful in the NFL. If I'm recruiting against that, the thing that I would say right away is, he didn't draft all that well toward the end of his career, so we'll start there. I don't know if he really knew what he was looking at. But the second thing is he never got anybody ready. We've always been the ones to get the guys ready for him, right? Mm-hmm. If I'm LSU, if I'm Ohio State, I would, and I'm in a battle with the receiver against UNC, I would honestly ask the question, do you think he can get you better than the receivers that we have put out over the last 4 to 5 seasons? You think he can do a better job than that? He's never had to get one of those guys ready. He just takes them, right? Like that, I think is going to be an interesting battle of like this idea of he knows what it takes, but he hasn't actually developed guys to get ready for the next level yet.
Yeah.
There's no track record.
Yeah. Well, and then the other piece is part of what made Belichick successful is like, you talk about a 400-page report on his vision for UNC. He won because he was the most prepared, and he's clearly maybe the most intelligent head coach of all time. Like he's certainly in that conversation. What you have to understand is when you're dealing with college kids, particularly with the 20-hour rule, there's a limit to what these guys are going to be able to grasp. Yep. Okay, to your wide receiver point, maybe he wants to run an NFL system. I heard Chad Ochocinco talk about when he got to the Patriots. Randy Moss talked about this, like, oh, it's not just a post route. It's a post route versus this coverage. It's a hook route versus this coverage. It's 6 different plays. College kids can't do that. The whole system is going away from that and saying, run what's called and then run to green grass. It's going simple. So that's my other concern is it doesn't matter how much knowledge you have. It matters how much knowledge your players can absorb from you. And I wonder what that level is going to be at North Carolina.
Yeah. The last thing I'll say, and the NFL people never say this, but I think this is part of the trepidation for why like NFL jobs weren't calling him. Is there's this control thing, which I think UNC is willing to give him a certain level of control, but it is a university. And to that point, like there are certain things that need to happen a certain way. There's also this thought process of, I saw what this guy looked like in Cleveland before Tom Brady, and I saw what this guy looked like in New England after Tom Brady. And it's really hard to separate the Tom Brady years and what I saw before and after, and ask the question, is it actually the Bill Belichick greatness, or was it this combination of a player who was fully bought in, who could get other guys to buy in, who was always on point when he played and left there and was really successful while he kind of went the other way?
To that point, this is the other piece of this that from a legacy standpoint, man, his legacy is in check. You're only as good as your last rep. Like, we remember that last rep. So this is risky for him as well. Okay. That's the other piece.
Okay. So I think yes and no. I don't think anybody is going to think of him differently in the NFL circles if he comes out here and never wins a college game. The same way that people in college circles don't look at Urban Meyer and Nick Saban any differently.
True.
You know, like, I think they just say it's a completely, they're worlds apart in terms of what it takes to be successful as a coach in the sport.
Yeah. I just, I look at it and I think it's risky for him. I think it's risky for him. I think it's risky for a lot of reasons, but we shall see. Yeah,
I mean, listen, I just put out like every negative thing that could happen there. I think the reality is that he ends up being pretty successful. Is that winning a national title? I'm not exactly sure that they'll ever be cut out for that, but I do think that he's going to have UNC optimized in a way that they have never been before, right? Yeah. It's just this idea that I don't think it's as surefire as some of the talking heads. Last thing I'll say, Louis Riddick does a great job on ESPN. He does NFL. He also does college football. He calls games every week, and I think he's been phenomenal at both of those things. He probably had the most balanced take because he played for Bill Belichick, but he also is very in tune with the college game. And he's like, one of the things that he's going to struggle with is he didn't care about my personal life when I was a player. He's like, you need to come in here and be a pro regardless of what's going on. College, you got to be the dad. You got to be the counselor. You know, you got to be a little bit of everything.
It's true, though, too. I mean, both are true. You got to be a pro, but you got to care about my personal life. Like,
right.
Bill,
but I guess
be true, but you have to show some level of care, too.
I guess the difference is like, if you just expect guys to do things a certain way and you don't show that you can be invested in them, in their development as a person, they'll be out the door quicker than any other thing that could happen. True. And it would just be really hard to maintain a roster. It's unlike the NFL where you basically can threaten you won't have a job and we've got you under contract so you can't go anywhere else. And that's like always this push and pull with college football the way it is right now. There's so much freedom and ability to move around that it forces your hand as a coach to be the type of person that players want to be around for 2, 3, or 4 years.
Yeah. Hey, so, I mean, is that Dion?
I mean, the players love him, right? Like, and Dion's kind of got a little bit of a tough thing, but the guys who have come in have stayed the last couple of years and they played well this year. So who knows?
You look at Dion's success and, you know, I think about year one and how polarizing it was. And then there's another piece of this that I just don't think there's that many quality head coaches. I think a lot of people are there's been a lot of reaches and guesses. And you can't tell me Bill Belichick isn't immediately one of the best coaches in college football. That's the other final thing I'll say is I just think immediately he's one of the best, especially situationally. How many times do we see these coaches butcher games situationally? It's not going to happen with Bill.
I think yes to that, but there's, you know, some of the folks that were talking about potential bring in Matt Patricia and Joe Judge. Don't do that.
Don't do that.
Right. Like, no, but the moment you bring Matt Patricia into the building, like, first off, just from personality, I've met him a few times. Dog, you won't be able to recruit. Be able to recruit. People will be miserable.
Those players are out.
They're out. And that's going to be the challenge for him, though. He has a circle that's pretty defined of guys that he's worked with in the NFL.
Hey,
those cats can't make it happen in college.
His brother Steve I know Steve Belichick is beloved by the staff and his players out at Washington.
He's got to find a bunch of those though.
Yeah.
He can't bring Matt Patricia's with him. That's going to be cooked.
Yeah.
All right. Let's change directions here a little bit. I wanted to talk about some guys from University of Michigan. Mason Graham, Will Johnson opted out.
Okay.
Right, not going to play in the bowl game. They're going to the NFL. Top 10 players on just about everybody's big board. Give me, outside of the X's and O's scouting report, you know these guys personally. Tell me about them and why they're going to be an asset to an NFL franchise.
Mason Graham, I remember he was an early enrollee a few years ago, and I happened to be at spring ball that year, and I'm just going around. They're like, "Hey, you see number 55? He's going to be that guy," and I'm like, and he's an early enrollee, and he's playing in the trenches. Like, are you sure? That's just for our viewers. If you're a great high school receiver like Jeremiah Smith, like that'll translate on the edge, right? Being in the trenches, like you develop man strength. Like, you know how your dad would always, your dad might not have lifted weights, but your dad was strong. It's man strength. He, as a true freshman, early enrollee, halfway through his high school year, was manhandling dudes at Michigan. Remember, they had the Joe Moore Award-winning offensive line back then.
Right.
They were damn right. That he's just a guy. He's one of those guys that just gets it. He understands football. He understands leverage. He's like a kung fu fighter. He knows how to use your leverage against you. He's got the wrestling background that shows up on tape. Grip strength, core strength, balance, leverage. Like, gosh, man, he could easily be drafted number 1 overall because you can't miss with him. Like that you would draft him number 1 and say, I feel great about that. He's going to make an impact on my team. So that's my opinion on. We'll go to Will in a second, but what do you think?
Yeah, I agree with you on all the X's and O's things. When I look at guys who play in the trenches, one of the things that stands out to me is how often you finish on your feet versus how often you're flopping around on the ground after a play. And Mason Graham is always on his feet. He's always around the play if he's not making the play. Great contact balance. Footwork is really good. He's violent. He's explosive. Knows how to use his hands. I think he's a top 5 player in this draft from what I've done early on. The biggest question is like, I think Quinnen Williams might have been a top 5 pick, but the interior D linemen don't necessarily, they can be like top 10, top 15 guys. Being a top 5 guy is hard because everybody wants to make a run on quarterback or wide receiver, things of that nature. So I think
I'd take an interior D tackle over a wide receiver. I'll be honest with you. I'm just being real.
That's not, they went straight offense for the first 15 picks of this previous draft.
I know.
Right. Like I don't disagree with you. I played on defense. I know the value of having these guys and having a guy who can rush from the interior, get you TFLs, who can clog up holes. I know what the value is. I just know how the NFL is. And I think the biggest thing for him on draft day is just what the board looks like and who's picking where.
True. All right, Will.
All right, what about Will?
The best thing Will does, and I think that they need to, whatever team drafts him needs to have a plan to put him in the best position. Will is at his best playing zone coverage with his eyes in the backfield because then his instincts come to play. That dude, he has the best instincts of any player I've ever, like, seriously, and I don't go back that far, but I played with some great corners and I played against some great corners. He has the best instincts of anyone I'd ever seen. I cannot believe teams would ever throw outbreaking routes when number 2 was off and soft with his eyes in the backfield. I swear to God, I would have told my quarterback, dead, run it. I don't care. We'll punt it because it was almost a guaranteed pick 6. His length shows up. The interception last year against Marvin Harrison Jr. on a slant route. That was direct from film study. I heard him talk about it. The split pre-snap, like that's high level stuff. He's another guy. The only concern is he's dealt with a ton of injuries. I wonder if he can play 17 games and then get into the playoffs. But in terms of just a prospect, phenomenal. Yeah, no, he's definitely an ouchie guy. I think that's going to be a red flag. I love your breakdown of him as a player and all the things that show up on tape. I see the same things. Anticipation's there. Big film study guy. Great athlete. I think he likes to play physical on the outside. I don't think he's a super physical guy in the run game, but a lot of dudes on the edge aren't that anyway, so it's not like you downgrade him. To your point about playing him with his eyes in the backfield,
The one part of his game where I do think he's most susceptible is on double moves. I think that he can be cooked when you have him in a situation where he is trying to anticipate that first route. You can get behind him. You can coach that, though. You can coach a guy to have a little bit more patience or to understand the situations where you might get a double move or what coverages you can take a chance in. For example, if we got a blitz on, go ahead and jump the route. They ain't gonna have time for the double move. Right. That. Those are things that you can get around. I think he's another one of those guys where outside of questions about injuries, you're not going to miss on him.
Yeah, 100%. I don't know that he has 4.3 speed, but 4.4, mid 4.4, you don't care anyways. You know?
I don't need a guy who has 4.3 speed when he plays with great fundamentals and technique.
And length, and he's got great length too.
Like all that speed stuff, it's important. I'm not trying to minimize it, but like there are a lot of dudes who don't play nearly as fast because their fundamentals or their processing does not allow them to.
I'll tell you this, man. Those guys are so dang good. I just don't. Those are rare players that Michigan. It makes this past year frustrating because you're not replacing those guys going forward. I'm sorry. You just aren't. And those guys are rare air. So congrats to them on an amazing career. Good luck in the NFL.
All right. So let's talk about one thing real quick before we get out of here. We got to end with some Illinois flavor. They're taking on South Carolina in a top 20 matchup in the Citrus Bowl, I believe. There are people who try to tell me these games don't matter, bowl games or exhibitions. Jake is one of them sometimes. He likes to try to tell me that. Well, this game matters for both of these programs. I think either one of them is going to be extremely invested. Top line thoughts. What are you expecting out of this ball game?
Okay, Michigan, Alabama doesn't matter. Let's be real here. Michigan, Alabama.
Here you go.
That game does not matter. Illinois, South Carolina does matter, though. This one does, and both coaches have came out and said it. The player, this is huge. And Brett Bielema recruited me way back in the day. He's one of my favorite coaches to meet with.
Same.
Just an awesome human.
Yep.
And rightfully so, Signetti has dominated the headlines this year, Coach of the Year, Story of the Year, Program of the Year. But what Brett Bielema has done at Illinois has been nothing short of amazing. And the opportunity to get to 10 wins does not come around very often. And I give him a ton of credit because when I think of Brett Bielema's best teams, they were led by the trenches. He's adapted. They've won on the edges this year.
Yeah.
So that's one of those games that I think I hope we continue to promote it because I think people need to tune in to see. Those are two programs where that 10th win is going to mean a lot to them.
Yeah, I mean, I love the coaching matchup here. You mentioned Brett Bielema, one of my favorites as well. Just dialed in all the time. Really good teacher. And then you got Shane Beamer on the other side, who's like, a football coaching legacy. And he's done a heck of a job. He's had his team bought in. He's had them motivated. They caught some unfortunate bounces this year. I think they're better than what their record says they are. And their quarterback, Lenora Sellers, is one of the stories of the year. Going to be an early front runner for the Heisman next year. I think the kid is great. He can present some issues for Illinois. I think Bielema is going to have a plan for all of that, though, to keep that in mind. I think it's going to be one of those exciting games. I hope it ends up being one, but I circled that one immediately because it's not a CFP game, but I think it's going to have a feel of a really big time game.
Hey man, shout out to Pat Bryant. I love Pat Bryant, Illinois. I've said this on BTN a few times. Just like it's been really impressive to watch him go from, hey, this guy's making plays. Isaiah Williams was the go-to, and now he's blossomed into like one of the great Illinois receivers of all time and has made huge plays in huge moments. So I'm excited.
That play he had against Rutgers at the end of the game.
Woo!
Dog, he caught that ball, and I'm like, go down, go down. He started running. I said, score.
Took off. Let's go.
It was crazy. No, it was awesome. Like I said, it's a cap to a phenomenal season for either one of those programs. So, sure. Folks, don't let the people tell you that these bowl games don't matter. They absolutely do. But that'll do it for us right here on the Through the Whistle podcast. You can catch Jake and I on the Big College Football Show. That is Monday through Thursday on CHSN at 5 Central. But until then, checking out.
Yeah.